At 3 a.m., the monitors hummed, and my son arrived 11 weeks early. I pressed my palm to the plexiglass and typed with my free hand, "We are in the NICU. Please pray." I hit send to the family group and watched the 3 dots pulse. A minute later, my aunt replied with beach selfies from Maui. I stared until the phone blurred, and the nurse touched my shoulder and said, "Breathe, Mama. My name is Olivia Parker. I am 32, and I live in Denver. I build brand stories for small businesses, and for most of my adult life, I believed I knew how to solve hard problems. I married David after 3 years of friendship and one clumsy proposal in a coffee shop. We planned a quiet life with weekend hikes in the foothills and a dog that would grow old at our feet. We wanted a baby. We tried. We failed. We tried again. The miscarriages came like sudden storms. One in spring, one on a hot August night, one a week before Thanksgiving. I learned the language of loss and the art of showing up to work with swollen eyes. David held me when I shook and whispered that grief would pass and love would stay. Jake, my younger brother, called every Sunday and never told me to move on. My dad remarried years ago. Eleanor is polite and careful and always leaves first. Aunt Betty taught me my mother's lemon bar recipe and mailed me handwritten notes when the days felt long. After the 3rd loss, David said we should leave town and find our old selves for a while. We flew to Maine in September and walked cliff trails until our legs burned. We ate chowder and slept like people who had never known alarms. 3 weeks later, 2 pink lines appeared that made my hands shake. I took another test and another. I called David at work and whispered, "I am pregnant." He did not speak. I heard his breath break, and then he said, "I am coming home." I wanted to tell my family and be brave. I hosted Sunday dinner in our apartment. My dad hugged me, but asked about my stepbrother's promotion before dessert. Betty squeezed my hands and cried happy tears. Karen lifted her glass and said finally, and added, "You are not getting younger." The room felt colder after that. I kept sending ultrasound photos to the group chat. My dad sent a thumbs up emoji. Betty asked about my cravings. Karen changed the subject to mortgage rates. Weeks passed, and hope grew inside me, like light at the end of a long tunnel. We painted a small room, a soft gray, and built a crib that pinched David's finger. At 20 weeks, the doctor said everything looked perfect. I whispered to the baby at night and promised him a slow arrival in a safe world. Then the back pain, then the blood, then the ride under fluorescent lights. At 29 weeks, the scalpel flashed, and Ethan entered the world without a cry. The team worked with quiet speed. Wires, tubes, numbers, a tiny chest that rose like a hummingbird. I sent the message for prayers and watched the screen. The only reply was the ocean in Karen's video and a smile I could not forgive. By the end of the first week, no one from my family had walked through the door at all. Not once. If you are watching this, drop a comment telling me where you are from. Hit subscribe and stay tuned to hear how I finally stood up for myself after years of being the forgotten daughter. When I first told my family I was pregnant, I thought maybe the past would be forgiven. We were at Dad's house on a Sunday night. The kitchen smelled like roast chicken, and Aunt Betty was setting out her lemon bars. I stood up, hands shaking, and said, "We are having a baby." Silence stretched until Betty gasped and clapped. Jake grinned like he had been waiting years for this. Dad nodded once and turned back to ask my stepbrother about his job. Eleanor smiled politely, as if she had just heard about the weather. Karen swirled her wine and said about time, And then let us hope you carry this one to term. I laughed it off in the moment, because that was easier than crying at the table. Later in the car, David squeezed my hand and said, "You know, we do not need their blessing. We just need each other." I tried to believe him. The first trimester was a blur of nausea, cravings, and fear that every ache meant another loss. I sent ultrasound pictures to the family group. Dad answered with a thumbs-up emoji. Betty asked how I was sleeping. Karen posted links about property values. Jake, at least, called to say he already had baseball gloves picked out. By the second trimester, I stopped sharing with most of them. It hurt too much to send pictures into silence. I saved my updates for Jake, who actually cared, and for David, who came to every appointment and cheered every tiny heartbeat. We decorated the nursery in soft grays and whites, with one corner filled with books we would someday read aloud. I put a framed photo of my mom by the crib. She died when I was 15, but I wanted her face in the room. One evening, at another family dinner, I left the table to get water and paused in the hallway. The kitchen door was half open. I heard Karen's voice, clear as a bell. She will never make it as a mother. She is too fragile, too dramatic. She just wants attention. Laughter followed. I stood frozen with the glass in my hand, cold water spilling onto my fingers. My legs would not move. My chest burned with shame and anger. When I walked back in, Karen was smiling at me as if nothing had been said. Dad asked about my due date, like he had just remembered I was pregnant. Betty fussed with the dessert plates, avoiding my eyes. Jake looked confused, sensing something was wrong, but not knowing what. I swallowed my words, but they cut my throat on the way down. That night, David asked why I was so quiet on the drive home. I wanted to tell him, but I stared out the window instead, watching the city lights blur into streaks. The truth felt like poison, and I was too tired to spill it. I told myself I could rise above it. I told myself the baby would change everything. But deep down, I knew something was breaking, and I whispered to Ethan inside me that I would fight for him, even if no one else in this family would. The contractions began on a Wednesday night. At first, I thought it was just back pain, the kind I had carried through the second trimester. But by dawn, I was doubled over, and David was rushing me to the hospital. The monitors lit up with steady lines that spelled trouble. "You are in preterm labor," the doctor said, and my world tilted. They gave me shots for Ethan's lungs, hooked me to IVs, told me to breathe. I gripped David's hand until his knuckles turned white. For 3 days, they tried to stop it. On the 4th, my water broke. They wheeled me into surgery, lights burning above me. Ethan came out tiny and silent at 29 weeks. No cry, no wail. Just the rustle of gowns and the hum of machines. I begged to hear something, anything, and the doctor said he is breathing, but her tone made me colder than ice. Hours later, I saw him for the first time, swaddled in tubes, wires tracing every fragile part of him. He weighed less than 3 pounds. His skin looked too thin for this world. A nurse whispered, "He is a fighter," and I pressed my fingers against the incubator wall, wishing glass could melt. I pulled out my phone and sent another message. "Ethan was born today. Please pray." I attached a photo of his hand curled around my finger, a hand so small it looked like a feather. I waited for comfort, for words, for anything. Karen sent a photo of waves crashing on sand with the caption "Paradise." Dad did not respond. Eleanor sent nothing. Betty texted praying. Only Jake called. His voice shook when he said, "I am here for you." Days blurred. I lived by the rhythm of the NICU. Alarms, oxygen stats, diaper changes done with surgical precision. David slept on the fold-out chair. But after 2 weeks, his leave ended. He hated leaving, but health insurance was our lifeline. Each night he dragged himself from work to the hospital. Each night he apologized for not being enough. Alone during the day, I stared at Ethan and thought of home. I thought of the apartment we had filled with love but left behind. I thought about Karen's cold eyes, about my father's silence. I wondered if someone might use the spare keys, if they might show up uninvited and act like they belonged in this fight. One afternoon, walking back from the pumping room, I told myself I should just change the locks, protect our space, make it ours again. But I did not. I told myself I had bigger battles, that locks could wait, that no one cared enough to come anyway. Yet the thought clung to me like a shadow. What if they did show up? What if I came home to find them there, sipping coffee at my table, as if they had supported us all along? The monitors beeped, and I jumped, heart racing. A nurse adjusted Ethan's tube and told me he was stable. I nodded, pretending calm, but inside I was unraveling. By the end of week 2, Ethan gained a few ounces. The nurses cheered. I took photos, sent them to the family chat, and stared at the blank screen. No replies. I whispered to Ethan, "You are not alone." But my voice cracked because some nights I was not sure if I believed it myself. "Where have you been?" he said. "I have been trying for hours." I told him I was in the NICU, same as always. Phone on silent. His voice dropped. "It is Aunt Betty. A drunk driver hit her this morning. Internal bleeding. Head injury. They do not know if she is going to make it." The room blurred. Betty, the only one besides Jake who had ever shown me warmth, was clinging to life, and I was here alone. But then Jake asked the question that cut me open. "Why are you not here, G?" "Dad says you have been getting plenty of support. Karen told everyone she has been bringing you meals, sitting with Ethan, helping you rest." I froze. My fork clattered to the tray. "That is a lie," I said. "She has not been here once." Jake's breath caught. "She showed Dad pictures," he whispered. "Photos of Ethan she claimed she took herself." My chest burned. Those were mine. I sent them to the family chat. She saved them, passed them off as her own. It got worse. Jake said Karen told the whole family I wanted privacy, that I was tired of updates, that I banned Dad from visiting because he reminded me too much of Mom. I pressed my hand against the table to steady myself. That is the opposite of everything I wanted. I begged for them to come. I begged for help. Jake swore. "I knew something was off," he said. He promised to go to Memorial, where the family had gathered for Betty. He said he would confront them with the truth. I whispered, "I cannot leave Ethan. He is still too fragile. I need to be here." Jake's voice softened. "I understand, but this is not over." When I hung up the cafeteria, noise faded into a distant hum. My whole body shook. It was not just neglect, it was deception. Karen had stolen my reality and rewritten it for everyone else. She had painted me as fragile, dramatic, unworthy of visits, while I sat here bleeding into breast pumps and praying my son would survive. I walked back into the NICU, heart pounding, afraid my tears would fog the incubator glass. Ethan stirred, tiny chest rising like paper lifted by wind. I placed my hand above him. "You are all that matters," I whispered. But the truth clawed inside me. Family was supposed to show up. Instead, lies had filled the space where love should have been. That night, after Ethan finally settled, I stared at my phone. The group chat showed Karen posting a photo of sunset on the beach with the words, "Counting blessings." My fingers hovered over the keyboard, but I did not type. I only thought one question, heavy and sharp as glass. When the people you love tell two different stories, which one do you believe? The one that comforts you, or the one that finally explains the ache you have been carrying? Jake showed up at the NICU 2 days later, eyes ringed with exhaustion and anger. He had been at Memorial, sitting with Betty's kids, listening as Karen spun her web. Everyone believed her. They thought she was the saint who brought casseroles and comfort. They thought I was the one who wanted silence. Jake dropped into the plastic chair across from me and opened his phone. "Look at this," he said. Screenshots. A separate family group chat I had never seen. My name wasn't even in the header. In it, Karen wrote long updates about Ethan's progress. She used the photos I had sent privately. She claimed she had been there, that she had rocked him to sleep, that she had comforted me. Dad had replied, "Thank you for stepping up." Cousins had said, "Karen, you are amazing." My hands shook so badly, I almost dropped the phone. It felt like betrayal, layered on betrayal. Not only had they abandoned me, they had praised the one who abandoned me most. My stomach clenched as I scrolled. There it was in black and white. Karen telling them I banned Dad from visiting because he reminded me too much of Mom. My throat closed. That was cruelty wrapped as fiction. Jake clenched his jaw. I confronted them. I told them none of it was true. Dad looked like he had been hit with a hammer. Lisa and Mark were furious. But Karen kept insisting. She said, "You are overwhelmed, and you just forgot who visited," as if I could forget being alone here every day. I pressed my hand against the incubator. Ethan stirred, his chest rising with the whir of oxygen. I whispered, "You are safe." But inside, I was breaking. David came after work, loosened his tie, and sat beside me while I showed him the screenshots. His face hardened. "We need proof," he said. "Something no one can spin." That night, while Ethan slept, I asked the nurse about visitor logs. She showed me the sign-in sheet. Every name recorded. Mine, David's, Jake's once. No Karen, no Dad, no Eleanor. The page was clean. Cold evidence in black ink. David and I ate bland cafeteria food and talked logistics. His job was pressing harder, insurance paperwork piling. My unpaid leave ticked away. Bills mounted like bricks. But beneath the exhaustion was fire. We would not let Ethan grow up believing lies about who cared. Jake texted me later. "I set up a video call for the family. Tonight, everyone will be in Betty's room. You can join from here." My pulse raced. I had never wanted confrontation, but silence had cost too much already. In the glow of Ethan's incubator, I drafted notes, gathered screenshots, printed the visitor log. My hands shook, but my resolve held. They would see the truth, even if it shattered every illusion. I looked at my sleeping son, his hand curled tight, like he was holding on for me too. Tomorrow, they will hear my voice. And this time, I will not mute. Jake set up the call from Aunt Betty's hospital room. My phone buzzed just after 7 in the evening, and I propped it on the small table beside Ethan's crib. The NICU lights were dimmed for evening care, monitors glowing green and yellow in the half-dark. My stomach twisted as the screen filled with faces I hadn't seen in weeks. There was Betty, pale but alive, reclined against a stack of pillows. Dad sat stiffly at her side, Eleanor's hand resting lightly on his shoulder. Lisa and Mark hovered at the foot of the bed. Other cousins leaned in from the back of the room, craning for a better view. And then I saw her, Karen, arms crossed, chin raised, looking at me through the camera like nothing was wrong. Jake's voice was steady. "Everyone's here. Go ahead." I lifted my phone so they could see Ethan in his crib. His tiny chest rose and fell beneath the wires and stickers. "This is your grandson, Dad," I said. "Your nephew, Lisa and Mark. Your great-nephew, Karen. He is 6 weeks old today, and not one of you has met him." A hush swept through the room. Betty's lips trembled. "Oh, Olivia," she whispered. "He's beautiful." Dad cleared his throat, his eyes wet, but his tone measured. Karen told us the NICU restricted visitors. She said only parents and grandparents were allowed. That you asked her to go in my place because I reminded you too much of your mother. The words sliced through me. I turned the camera back on myself. That is a lie. The NICU allows 4 designated visitors. David and I are 2. Jake is the 3rd. We saved the 4th, waiting for one of you to care enough to come. Confusion flickered across Lisa's face. "Karen, you told us the spots were filled." Karen straightened, wine glass just out of frame. "I was protecting Olivia's privacy," she said coolly. "She asked me to handle communication. She needed rest." "No," I said, my voice low but unshaking. "I begged for support. I texted updates that went unanswered. Meanwhile, you stole my photos, Karen, and passed them off as if you'd taken them yourself." Karen's smile faltered. "You've always been dramatic, Olivia, always needing attention." Before I could respond, Mark stepped closer to the laptop. He raised his voice. "Karen has been the only one keeping us informed. She showed us pictures, told us how Ethan was doing. She showed up when you couldn't. Maybe you just forgot who was there." The words hit me like a punch. Betrayal in my own cousin's mouth. My hands shook, but Jake cut in sharp. "She has not forgotten." He held up his own phone, scrolling through screenshots of the secret group chat. Lines of Karen's updates filled the screen. My photos, my words, twisted into her lies. Betty gasped. Dad's jaw clenched. Eleanor's face went pale. Karen waved a dismissive hand. "I only told them what they needed to hear. No one wants every ounce charted, every oxygen stat recited." "That was never your decision," I said. My throat burned, but I kept going. "You told them Dad was banned because he reminded me of Mom. You told them I didn't want calls. You built walls around me when I was already drowning." Karen leaned forward, eyes flashing. "I visited," she snapped. "The first week. You were sleeping, so I didn't wake you. The nurses had everything under control. There was no reason for all this drama. Something in me steadied. I pulled the photo of the NICU visitor log onto my screen and held it up. Every visit is recorded. Here are the names. Mine, David's, Jake's once. No Karen, no Dad, no Eleanor. Blank pages where family should have been." For a moment, the room on the other side froze. Every eye turned toward Karen. Dad shook his head slowly. Betty whispered, "Karen, how could you?" Karen sputtered. "Maybe they forgot to write me down. Maybe the nurse missed it." Lisa, voice sharp, said, "That is impossible. They made us scrub in just to wave at Ethan through glass. There is no way they missed you." Karen's face twisted, but Mark still tried to defend her. "You can't just accuse without proof," he said, glaring at the camera. I met his stare. "Then, why does the log show 0 visits? Why is every one of your so-called updates a picture I took and sent myself?" Silence spread like smoke. On my screen, Betty looked stricken. Eleanor covered her mouth, and Dad lowered his head into his hands. The weight of truth pressed down on everyone. Only Karen kept talking, voice shrill now. "I was protecting the family. I was sparing them the endless drama." Jake slammed his hand on the table. "Drama?" His voice cracked with rage. "Ethan is fighting for his life. Olivia has been alone. That is not drama. That is reality." The camera shook as if someone in the room had pushed back their chair. Voices overlapped. Lisa demanding answers. Dad muttering he should have called me himself. Betty starting to cry. I stared at my screen, my own reflection pale but unflinching. For weeks, I had begged for help. For weeks, I had wondered why no one cared. And now, the truth was right there, unraveling in front of all of them. I wanted to hold on to my anger, to remind him of the weeks of silence, but when I saw his hand hovering uncertainly over the incubator, I let out a long breath. "You're here now," I said, "and that matters." His eyes filled as he leaned over Ethan's crib. "Hello, little one. I'm your grandpa. I'm sorry I was late." Eleanor entered behind him, carrying the paper bag. "We thought you could use some things," she murmured. Inside were soft slippers, a journal made for NICU parents, and a gift card to the hospital cafe. It wasn't redemption, not yet, but it was a beginning. Jake arrived soon after, juggling coffee and a tired smile. He had been at Betty's bedside all night and still came straight to the NICU. He pulled up a chair, washed his hands, and asked the nurse to show him how to hold Ethan skin to skin. For an hour he sat perfectly still, with my son curled against his chest, whispering, "You're stronger than you know." Watching him, I realized my brother had given me more family than anyone else combined. Betty, still recovering from surgery, called me that evening. Her voice was raspy but steady. "I should have known Karen was twisting things," she said. "She has carried jealousy since we were children, but I never thought she'd go this far." I felt tears sting my eyes because finally someone was naming it. Someone saw me clearly, but not everyone was ready to face the truth. 2 days later, Karen herself appeared at the NICU doors, clutching a teddy bear nearly bigger than Ethan. The nurse stopped her politely, explaining she wasn't on the approved visitor list. Karen argued, "I am his great aunt. I have every right." The nurse paged me. I walked to the entrance and met Karen's eyes. "No," I said. "You forfeited that right when you lied to everyone and left me alone. Ethan deserves honesty. You showed none." Her face flushed crimson. "You're tearing this family apart," she hissed. I felt the old instinct to flinch, but instead, I said calmly, "The family tore itself apart when you chose deception over love." She turned on her heel and stormed out, the bear dangling limply from her hand. That night, my phone buzzed with a long email. Karen painted herself as the victim, claimed she had only tried to protect me from stress, accused me of exaggerating. I didn't finish reading. I hit delete. Some messages aren't worth the ink they're written with. Back in Ethan's room, I laid my palm against the incubator, feeling the faint heat of his tiny body through the plastic. "You are loved," I whispered. "You won't have to fight for family the way I did." My voice cracked, but it was steady enough to be a promise. I finally understood something. Boundaries aren't cruelty. They are protection. Protection for my son, for David, and for myself. And with that, I drew my line. From now on, family isn't decided by blood. It is chosen by love. The day Ethan was discharged felt surreal, like stepping into a dream I had almost stopped believing in. 8 weeks and 3 days had passed since his tiny body was lifted from me under harsh surgical lights. Now, he weighed just over 5 pounds, breathing on his own, drinking from a bottle without alarms, shrieking. The nurses clapped quietly as they handed me the paperwork and hugged us goodbye. "You're ready," Maria said, her voice full of warmth. "You know him better than anyone." David carried the car seat as if it contained glass. I walked behind him, heart hammering at every step toward the exit. Outside, the air smelled sharp and free compared to the recycled hospital ventilation. The city seemed too loud, too bright, too full of germs, but also alive with promise. We strapped Ethan in, triple-checking every buckle. David drove 10 miles under the speed limit, while I sat in the back, eyes locked on the rise and fall of our son's chest. When we reached the apartment, Jake was waiting with balloons and a banner taped across the doorway that read, "Welcome home, Ethan. Dad and Eleanor were there too, carrying grocery bags and containers of food they had prepared. Their presence didn't erase the past, but it showed me they were trying to build a different future. We stayed in the doorway for photos, then ushered everyone inside for a brief moment of celebration. They kept their voices low, washed their hands, and left early so we could settle into our new rhythm. The quiet that followed was both peaceful and terrifying. For weeks, I had lived with the hum of NICU machines and the comfort of nurses a button away. Now, it was just David, me, and our son, whose lungs had fought harder than anyone's in the room. That night, I barely slept, jolting awake at every sound. But with each sunrise, our confidence grew. Life at home meant feedings every 3 hours, diaper changes in the soft glow of a lamp, whispered lullabies while the city slept. Every ounce he gained felt like a victory. Every drowsy smile, even if the doctors insisted they were reflexes, felt like a miracle written just for us. The days were exhausting, but they were ours. Weeks later, when Ethan was stronger, we attended a small gathering at Betty's house to celebrate her recovery. The family was quieter now, cautious, but different. Betty hugged me carefully and whispered, "I can't wait to hold him when you say the word." Dad carried Ethan's photo in his wallet, showing it to anyone who asked. Even Eleanor started checking in with texts that asked nothing in return. Not everyone came. Some cousins stayed away, embarrassed perhaps, or unwilling to face what had happened. Karen wasn't invited. During the party, she texted me a long message, full of justifications and half apologies. I didn't answer. Forgiveness, I realized, didn't always mean reconciliation. Some doors are meant to stay closed. What mattered now was Ethan's laugh when Jake made faces at him. It was Dad's voice softening as he whispered bedtime stories, finally present in a way he hadn't been for years. It was Betty telling me family should be built on truth, not appearances. And it was the NICU mothers who still messaged daily, reminding me we had survived together. On Ethan's first birthday, we gathered in our apartment with those who had proven themselves by action, not just by blood. The nurses came, Jake cooked, Dad held Ethan while Eleanor snapped photos. Betty brought a cake, topped with a single candle. We sang softly, tears in our eyes, because the moment was more than just a birthday. It was a triumph, a reminder of how far we had come. Looking around that room, I realized family had been rewritten. It wasn't about who shared my last name. It was about who showed up, who stayed, who chose love over comfort. Ethan would grow up knowing this story, not as a tale of betrayal, but as proof of resilience. He would know he was wanted, fought for, and cherished from the first breath he took. And I would teach him the lesson the NICU carved into me. Life is too fragile for hatred, too precious for bitterness. We can acknowledge pain without letting it chain us. We can protect our hearts with boundaries and still choose forgiveness, still choose love, because the only way forward, the only way to truly live, is to let go of the weight of anger and walk toward the light of what remains.